Hello and welcome to this episode of Akrinos Access. I'm your host, Eric Matei, joined today by Ankit Patel, the founder of my business care team, for a really insightful conversation around BPOs. And we're posing this question, evaluating, is business process outsourcing or BPO right for your eye care practice? So, Ankit, hello, welcome to Akrinos Access.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Yeah, man. Really looking forward to this. We connected earlier this year and had some really fascinating conversations around this topic. And now as the world becomes ever more connected through technology, there's really fascinating ways to grow and scale your business through a lot of really far out options, and BPO being one of those. So, and Keith, why don't we start with, let's just start by, if you could just like define business process outsourcing. What exactly is it, and how can it serve the modern optometry practice?
Yeah, I guess I'll give like an overall arching picture of what everything looks like. So everyone's heard of outsourcing by this point, nearshore, offshore, whatever it might be, right? BPO is a term that's associated with VAs, right? Those two are very closely related. I think most people are probably familiar with VAs in the industry. So VA are virtual assistants, people who work remotely for you. They can be anywhere in the world. A lot of them now, real popular, are in the Philippines. So a lot of the VA companies source from the Philippines, but not only from the Philippines. There's some that do Central America, but just wherever there's a labor arbitrage pricing difference. VA companies are usually ones that help you find people, but you still have to manage and train them, and they become like a staff person for you. They're virtual staff person, effectively. Now, a BPO is a little bit different. What a BPO does is business process outsourcing, meaning that you're paying them to manage that whole line of service for you. So you don't have to come up with the training and all this. They take what you have, turn it into an effective, highly run, efficient process with metrics, management, coverage, all the 9 yards, right? So you don't have to worry about as much. So it's a different level of care. One basically says I'm getting a person, a body. The other one says I'm getting the service delivered to me.
Okay, yeah, and I think it's really important to point out that contrast, because again, to your point, virtual assistant and remote teams is getting to be more and more common. But so I think for starters, and for our viewers out there, right, business process outsourcing, think of it as, again, outsourcing for the solution, where it's an all-encompassing business solution, as opposed to that virtual assistant, which is still, you're going to be responsible for training them and onboarding and all of that. So why don't we start to kind of look at this through then application to the modern optometry practice? Because while certainly not everything can be outsourced through a BPO, what are some of these areas where BPOs are serving modern eye care practices?
So there aren't. So one that you may be familiar with most are usually insurance and billing companies. So they're technically a BPO, depending on how involved they are with your process. You basically tell them, "Here's a bunch of money. Go file this for me and maximize my return." Right. And if they're a good BPO, they'll give you metrics, deliverables, reporting on what they're doing. If they're not as good, won't be quite as transparent. So that's one that folks are most familiar with. Our company, my business care team, does it for phones as well as some insurance, pulling verification, benefits, recalls, things like that.
Yeah. So when we then kind of drill down then and looking in some of these areas, right, let's maybe discuss how the BPO impacts the practice in a few different regards. And we're always fascinated by, first and foremost, how it's going to impact the patient journey, and then certainly operations and workflows, and then the economics and profitability.
So there's quite a bit there. So in terms of the patient flow and the patient experience, I can't speak for every BPO or every VA company. What I can do is I can speak with our journey and what we've done. And we're really particular on making sure that it becomes integrated as part of the office's team. So they know almost as much as everything the person in the office knows. They'll get optical training in terms of we put them through some AOA training as well, like the para-optometric training. So they have a decent baseline knowledge of what is optometry, and so it's not just a pure phone answering service. They actually know
Sure.
what they're talking about. And then the patient feels like, oh, I'm understood and I'm heard. So one of the common concerns is, well, if I give my phones to someone else, or if I have someone who doesn't live in our area or out of the country, are people going to understand them? And the answer at this point is unequivocally yes, they will. You just got to have the right person, the right fit, and the right training put in place for that. So the patients have a great experience, and we measure that, right? We have both AI scoring phone calls, interactions, as well as our manual scoring, and we also have customer CSAT surveys post call that we look for. So we have several ways of tracking that, so we know if the staff members are doing a good job or not. And it was nice to see that from my internal team too when we got that put in place, so I could see how they're performing as well. But that's from a patient experience standpoint. You can put things in place to make sure that patients are still having a great experience. And then from you, I think you touched on it from a cost perspective, right? That's one of the biggest advantages. And not only from just a pure how much I pay people, you can pay anywhere from, I've seen as low as like, $7 an hour to, $20. We typically go between 11 to 15, depending on what level of service. So the pure price is usually lower than what you get in your area, but more importantly, turnover, right? So one of the things that we noticed in our practice and some other practices, that when we augmented our team with having someone answer phones and doing admin tasks, we had fewer people in office. We paid them better. So because we paid them better, we actually reduced our turnover, fixed our turnover problem. We didn't need to hire as many people, and the people we did hire were better caliber because they got paid over market. So they were
That's
more productive.
fascinating.
Yeah.
That is really fascinating. I suppose a side note, because you were mentioning in you all's practice. So you and your wife own Classic Vision
Classic
in
Vision Care.
Atlanta.
Yep. Right now it's 2 locations in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So and perhaps we should have. And I failed to toss that out there earlier in the conversation, Ankit, because I do think what's really fascinating about this is that the vision for this, and looking forward to learning more and more about BPO and how you guys help practice, right? But it's important to point out that the vision for this was very organic, right? I mean, you all own these practices and noticed that there was an opportunity for you to, I mean, in this case, it sounds to me like there's a lot of pluses at all touches. I mean, as far as ensuring the patient journey, the metrics, the monitoring, from a standpoint of profitability, it's really fascinating to consider how this is afforded you all an opportunity to pay your on-site team at a premium to the market. And we all know the impact that that has on turnover and overall production and culture and all these things. So that's really fascinating. So let's dig a little bit deeper then also and talk from an operational standpoint. I think sometimes when we're talking about virtual assistants, in this case BPOs, sometimes it's wondering, okay, how is this going to like mesh with my current operations? So why don't you speak to that a little bit, Ankit?
Yeah. And so one of the things I do want to mention too is all the lessons learned. We've learned over 5 years of doing it for ourselves. So we went through quite a few hard knocks of learning how to
Sure.
do this properly and effectively. And in terms of so your question, sorry, could you repeat the question one more time so I can clarify?
So particularly, it seems that one of the things that a lot of doctors are curious about, and not just doctors of optometry, but I mean anyone who's exploring having a remote team, is how is it going to work with the existing operations? What's the integration going to look like? What is that, adoption timeline? What is my onboarding cost? So maybe you could speak to it from some of those, the headaches of cost, because I think the dollars and cents speak for themselves, right? I mean, you mentioned it yourself, the ROI, and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, if you have a good understanding of the financials of your practice and your practice economics, it can be pretty straightforward to see how the numbers would plug in. But I think what holds a lot of folks back is perhaps the burden of the change, right? Kind of that change management piece. So why don't you speak a little bit about how the operations do indeed integrate? Like exactly what does it look like for someone to have a BPO in the practice?
Sure. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'll do this real quick. Can you guys see that? Can you see that okay?
Here we go. We
There it
just
is.
tossed it in there.
Okay. There we go. So, and I'll walk through this. So, and I can't speak about every BPO, but this is the difference between a BPO and a VA company. So we have a 4-phase process. Phase 1 and 2 are pre-go live, and phase 3 and 4 are post-go live. So what we do in phase 1 and 2 is phase 1 is usually hiring and bringing them on board for initial training. And phase 2 is a deeper dive into processes and cultural training and office specific flows. And then phase 3 is ramp up to production levels for around service level, quality, and productivity. And then phase 4 is ongoing support. And so what you're really referring to is all the lessons that we learned in phase 1 and phase 2 of how to integrate into an office. So every office is different.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and let me show you. So we'll do like a typical like flow like this for an office. So it's like a giant decision tree flow where these triangles are decision points, and all these other are different tasks or how to actually make appointments or whatever the clients want. Sometimes it's, hey, send it back to the office, and this is the phone number you send it back to, and this is how we handle it. If someone picks up, deal with it this way. If someone doesn't pick up, this is how you track it and call them back. And so that goes into SOPs. So we get into SOPs, which are standard
We
operating
love the
procedures.
SOPs.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
standard operating procedures, which we'll go into standard operating procedures. We'll create test material around that. So we test the agents prior to coming on board on the individual's offices. We'll also have like targets and checkpoints of where everyone should be at certain points. So there's a lot of different variables that we check from a performance standpoint, but we also want to make sure that we have clear instructions. Now, 90% of the time, people don't have everything lined up, which is completely fine. So because of that, there usually is some sort of transitionary period that we want to say, hey, be aware. We're going to be very responsive. We're going to talk daily to figure out what's going on, what's not working, what do we miss, and update it and fix it and move it forward. So I think that piece on the front end, being very responsive to fix as you go, so we can streamline the SOPs, is going to be important for most folks.
Absolutely. So it's very much, if we are talking about this integration piece, it's important for folks to understand that, and again, that's one of the big contrasts between the virtual assistant, where it's simply a remote team member, but you're still having to train them and onboard and all and what have you. Whereas the BPO, at least what you all have created in my business care team, the BPO is very, very very regimented. The structure, sure, every practice is different, but the process is going to be the same across the board. And certainly, to your point, the fact that you all own multi-location practice in a really big competitive market, I think, is a testament. Also, you've certainly worked out the kinks, right? So let's talk about when do you all see as kind of that right time for a practice to deploy a BPO? I mean, is it something that is feasible for a cold start? Is it something more like you find these different thresholds of scale? Where do you guys find it's kind of the best time for someone to start exploring those?
So there's a range, right? You can do it at a cold start, right? Because it's still pretty cost effective. So like I said, our baseline starts around 11.50 an hour. Some markets are minimum wage 15, which in that case, it's a no brainer, right? And so that gives you support and augmentation there. Now, the more scale you have, the more effective a BPO will be, right? So if you have if you're, let's just say, I'm going to make up numbers, 600,000 in revenue over plus, you have enough scale, you might have an internal manager, which can kind of help manage different departments. This would be a department that your manager could manage outside of your normal staff, and they integrate with the team. If you're smaller, it's usually the doctor that kind of is the manager too. And that can get a lot for the doctor in general to manage. So one nice thing about a BPO is that they'll help you with the management side of it, because they take off the management piece of it. And since we do have optometry practices, a lot of times we make recommendations like, well, this is what we do in our practice. This is what other practices do. Maybe you should try it this way. And so that helps. So even though it may not be completely cost effective for a startup, you get a lot of benefits from the management or expertise as well with that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And to your point, it's all about scale. right? As a matter of fact, I mean, so you guys have been doing this for a number of years. What's the biggest operation that you guys have come to working with as far as doors or just production?
It's a pretty big. It's obviously an ophthalmology practice. They're the
Sure.
biggest revenue wise. They're pretty big, and then they have probably, gosh, I think 400 to 500 calls a day. So
Wow.
yeah, they handle quite a few calls, and that's like 2 or 3 locations. Maybe I think they have 4 now, 3 or 4. So yeah, they're growing pretty well. And
Yeah.
that's the biggest
Yeah.
one. We have several like multi-location offices, but we also have some that are like, hey, we have Costco leases that we want, like one Costco lease or one startup practice, right? So it runs the gamut of folks that we work with.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you really do touch on, I think, the importance of realizing that and inviting people to look at this as it is a business solution in the same way that, you know, website and media presence is part of your marketing strategy, right? I mean, there's definitely a place for the BPO and certain functions of the practice. You know, something else that I definitely want to touch on, Ankit, it's something we had discussed a few weeks back when we were having one of our pre-conversations. But that is how BPO, in this case, where it's offshore, where you're also providing a job to someone in another part of the world who perhaps would not otherwise have an opportunity like this, right? So, because I think sometimes some folks are like, oh, you're just going after cheap labor, and I can understand where at the surface one may feel that way, but I think it's important to look at it from the angle of, you know, what one may find an opportunity here to find that labor at a slightly lower rate. For that other individual, this could be like a really great opportunity for them that they wouldn't otherwise have. So why don't you speak a little bit now as far as, you know, how that kind of that human resource people management goes, and perhaps speak of it from a people development piece, but also regarding some of the structures and systems that you all have in place to ensure that your talent is top notch.
Yeah, and that's another interesting challenge we've had. So the there's a lot there to that conversation. We could have a whole podcast just on talent
Sure.
management, interviewing, and hiring. I'll try to keep it high level because we spend a lot of time and effort around that. So from our team, first off, which country are you in? Because there's subtle cultural differences between the different countries. And right now, we're most of our team is in the Philippines. We're actually looking at expanding down to South America, and there's a different culture there, different languages, different time zones. So understanding how that works. And so be aware of that. Culturally, there's going to be some differences, language differences, and how people present in terms of language. Is it British English? Is it Spanish English? Is it, you know, American English? That's going to be a difference. So all our agents, we do a certain entry level assessments. So we look for, first off, there's got to be a certain amount of technology that they have, a certain amount of connection, typing speed, some basics. Then we look at the resume, making sure that they're going to be good candidates, just like we would at any other job, right? Are they job hoppers? Are they not? Do they have relevant work experience? And most importantly, can they learn how to do something new? Because this is relatively new to the industry. Not many people know how to do optometry specific items, especially US based optometry. We have some candidates and clients in Canada, which it's a little easier there because they don't have as much insurance challenges. But we got to test that. Can they learn? And we do English testing. We do motivation testing, a form of not exactly IQ testing, but basically like, hey, critical thinking skills, in addition to all the other things. And then we have a 3 or 4 layered interview process. And then we go through our training process. And our training process, it's more, we actually want a lower pass rate in that because we want to make it really hard to make it through our training. So someone that goes through all that, makes it through training, is someone who's going to be able to handle things a little bit better. So having all that put in place and understanding what to ask, how to ask, when to ask it, what standards to hold are really critical for getting the right people on your team.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and I know also you've got a really strong team on site that you've got a very close working relationship with, that really ensures that all of this is being fulfilled and delivered, right? Really, really fascinating stuff. So why don't we talk a little bit about, you know, just where to start? I mean, for someone who's, been seeing this. I mean, clearly virtual assistants, it's been kind of a buzzword here over the last couple of years. Looks like the light overheated. Uh, but virtual assistants been a hot topic, BPO, business process outsourcing. So why don't we talk about where to start? I mean, for somebody that's kind of exploring this, what's step one?
So step one, so what I will do is I'll be happy to answer any questions people have. So step one, if you go to our website, mybcat.com, and schedule a discovery call, be happy to just have a conversation because we own practices too. A lot of times those conversations end up being, hey, I'm having these challenges with my practice. Well, what about try these things or that thing? So my background is in consulting and operations prior to being owning a couple of different locations. So I have a bit of a background in that. So hopefully that adds some value. And it's not always the right answer for everyone. And I tell folks that, right? And so we can kind of help navigate that. We have a lot of resources on our website, different blog posts around security, what to think about, how to streamline the process. I encourage, obviously, Google searching, right? You can just Google search different things. But a lot of the resources will be at mybcat.com if you're curious about that.
Excellent. Fascinating. So on that, why don't we talk a little bit more about mybcat.com and just kind of, what it looks like. I mean, for someone that is like, hey, you know what? I've been seeing this for a while. I'm ready to go. Maybe if you could give someone, and I know you had shared some slides a moment ago, but maybe just speak conceptually as far as like, hey, this is kind of the timeline that you can expect if you're ready to go live with this. Give us a little crash course on what that might look like.
Yeah. So is it okay if I share the slide again? Just
absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Let me
please.
Bring that up so we can see. So typically we'll call it days. So before day zero is when you say, yes, I want to move forward. Let's do this. I'm ready. Before that, there's usually some piece of, I don't know if this is right for me, or I need to figure out if this is right for me. And that's anywhere from people who are like, I'm fully staffed, but I feel like I could use like a little extra support, to I needed help yesterday. And you got enough what I need, so let's just move forward quickly. So it depends on where you're on that spectrum. So let's say you start the engagement. The way it works is you say, okay, here's the agreement. All our agreements are 30-day opt-out. So if you don't like us, you just give us 1 month's notice to transition people over. So it's month to month, no long-term contracts with us at least. And what we say is, okay, you do the search fee, which you get back in your first month, and we start looking for your team. From that point all the way to ramp, we shoot for 77 days. So that's under a quarter, have someone completely ramped up in your process and integrated in. Typically, we will go faster than that, depending how complex your process is, but the more complex processes can take about the 77 to 90-day mark to really ramp up on.
Yep.
And
that's
so
amazing.
and that's going through the hiring, the training, the developing, ongoing performance and quality measures, and then ongoing performance.
Yeah, that's something else, Ankit. I got to tell you, because even just kind of thinking back to earlier in our conversation, where we're talking about the impacts that a BPO can have, right? Impacts to, across the patient journey, operations, impact to the bottom line. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to think that in less than 1 quarter's time, all of those benefits can be there for the practice. Really, really fascinating stuff. Let's see. Go ahead.
I was going to say one other thing too. Our clients who have been with us for longer, what ends up happening is that the team gets more and more entrenched and more competent with what they can do, and they'll start taking on more and more activity over time. So it's one of these things that, they'll take 90 days to get up to speed on what we want to say we can deliver, but they'll start delivering more and more value over time as we get more, take off more off the office's plate.
Yeah. Love it. Really, really amazing stuff. So, Ankit, as we're kind of wrapping it all up here, really great insights here, talking about BPOs, business process outsourcing, and if it's right for your optometry practice. Before we go, how can folks connect with you if they want to continue the conversation or learn more about my business care team?
Yep. Mybcat.com. My business care, that's MYBCAT. So B as in boy, CAT.com. Or my email, Ankit, ANKIT @mybcat.com. Those are the two best ways. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Ankit Patel, thank you so much for joining us here on Akrinos Access. To our viewers out there, we hope you found this valuable. And if you're in private practice, looking to get into private practice, definitely got to check out how a BPO can serve your practice. For more great practice management insights, subscribe to the Akrinos YouTube channel, follow us on the socials, and head on over to akrinos.com, browse our solutions and how we can help you take your practice to the next level. So, Ankit, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Eric.